All right, we got that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We ready? Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Seventh City. No, I'm still on the Seven Cities Forum, but welcome to Portsmouth Coffee Talks Evening Edition show. My name is James Slim Overton, and I'm here with my co-hosts Leah Drake Stitt and Thomas the Colonel Chapman. Hello, co-host. How you doing?
All right.
Wonderful. This wonderful
Boy,
Black History Month beginning.
Black History Month. This is our first
Yes.
show in the Black History Month, and
Yes.
I thought it would be appropriate if we started off with a recent, well, not recent guest. I don't know, was that last year? Well, a former guest, Dr. Colita, Nicholas Fairclough at
That.
Fairfax. I know some Faircloughs. I'm sorry, they're real good friends, but we're glad to have her back with us, and she graciously agreed to come back with us in her busy schedule as a professor over there at Norfolk State in the Evelyn Strong School of Social Work. And we're going to come, and when I contacted her, she said, okay, well, what we're going to talk about this. Last time it was about the 1619 project. And, I'm going to read what I sent to her. This just came out, and I suggested we talk about how could the cancellation of African-American studies by governors in Florida, Virginia, and other states affect the future of Black and white students in our schools as they prepare to enter our HBCUs and PWIs across the country? And that was the first question. So that was sort of a lead off to where our conversation will go this evening. So Dr. Fairfax, would you like to start on that premise there?
It's my pleasure to be with my colleagues, and I want to commend you for this very important advocacy and educational work that you do through this medium to elucidate for our community the pressing issues facing who we are as unashamedly Black people. I just commend you for this work, and I thank you so much for this work. When the 1619 project unfolded in 2019, in addition to all of the commemorative events that recognized the landing of the ship White Lion in present-day Hampton at Point Comfort, August 1619, as chronicled in John Rolfe's diary, there have been pushback with regards to the legitimacy of 1619 as an entry point into a plantation settler colony civilization, which is what America is. In 2020, President Trump created the 1776 Commission, which was tasked to essentially push back on what 1619, the studies, discussions around 1619 meant and mean, and to also push forth a narrative that America started in 1776 with the Declaration of Independence, thus nullifying anything that occurred prior to 1776. So in other words, not including the genocide of the Aboriginal people on these shores, the enslavement, which became the major economic political system that created America and has perpetuated as an anti-Black civilization since then. So what we do find today, 2023, we find that it continues to be, but now really pushed forth and amplified by some of the events and others, including the low white birth rate and some other factors. We find now this focus and push to legitimize what I call patriotic education. And so it's not critical thinking education, it's not intellectualism, it's patriotic education, in that it doesn't mean that you are including everyone, but that you are teaching a love of America and a greatness of America without questioning and including its deficits. You're also teaching an America that includes narratives about whiteness, about white culture, again, not including many of the facets of America that wouldn't be America without Black people, without people of African descent, without including contributions, culture, but also without any analysis then as to what has happened with other persons, other people, other groups of people that are as important. That also is a part of how we should understand America. This is not by happenstance. This is purposeful. It's intentional, and we should be first of all glad that the devils are coming from out behind, exposing
Amen.
themselves
That's right.
for who they are. And we should absolutely then not stay in this trauma, but return to our Sabbath schools, our freedom schools, our neighborhood schools.
Girl,
You don't
you
go to
speak the truth.
Pharaoh and ask for
Yes.
freedom. You don't
You
go to
speak the truth.
Pharaoh
That's
and ask
right.
for freedom.
That's
You
right.
take the freedom. So we, as a community, we have all of these mediums at our disposal. I understand fighting the good fight. I think that should be fought, but we also need to be clear that we have the ultimate responsibility to educate and socialize our children.
Dr. Pat, I just want to say first that even though the devil is showing his face, some people refuse to see it. But anyway, before the hosts get in there, I wanted to say that we are all representing HBCUs this evening, and the Colonel can represent two. He also can represent that other HU. I don't know which one is the real one, Howard or Hampton, but we have a representative of Howard, so we'll let them work that out. But anyway, we're beginning of Black History Month. We're representing HBCUs here tonight. But host, go ahead and
I would just say, in light of what you have just said, Dr. Fairfax, we do DARE in the schools for the third graders.
Yes.
And I had my jersey on today, said Black History 365 days, 24/7, and a third grader walked up and asked me, what is Black history? Hurt my heart, because 27 years ago, I started the group Sankofa, working with our young kids, teaching our kids their history, taking them to historical places, and it's just a reminder that you have to go back to the past and you have to acknowledge your past. You take the best of what you have acknowledged and bring it to the present so that you can move forth into the future. And our kids just don't know. They're not being taught. They're not being taught at all. They don't have a sense of history at all. And so what happens? We're going to have a whole generation of kids. And this is not just the grade schoolers. You have kids in high school who they just don't know. And like you said, we got to go back to those Saturday schools. When you travel the country, Native Americans have schools that Native Americans are putting on for their kids. Jewish people have schools that they're putting on schools for their kids so their kids can learn their history. We're the only ones who think that we need to let the public school system teach our kids our history, and they're not going to get it. And
I just have to add this. You said a third grader didn't know what Black history was.
Ask me what was Black history.
But yet we have a first.
I thought he was being facetious. I really did. I thought you just playing.
But sure. yet we have a first grader that knows what a gun can do.
Thank you. Can shoot a gun.
Yeah.
How about that?
Chew on that.
Chew on that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we got to take it upon us. Each one teach one. That was the message from some time ago. Each one teach one. So we really have to get back to teaching our kids.
We're already in this position like that, and you mentioned about that, and we get the help from DeSantis and our governor here.
Thank you.
In trying to even destroy what's out there for them to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's where we are right now, and it's been like that for a while. But like you said earlier, Dr. Fairfax, they're just doing it right in our face now.
Mm-hmm.
It's always been kind of covert. They want to sort of, hide the history or not tell the complete truth about the history. And as soon as we get to the point where we try to present some kind of Black pride and people are interested in doing it, now they want to walk it back and say, no, y'all can't tell that story.
Yeah, so I think we should be clear that when history textbooks begin to be really popular and when history curriculum and other curriculums became quote unquote mandatory in the 50s and the 40s, when history began to be written during the quote unquote lost cause decade in the 1890s, there was absolutely the intent to write history from the perspective of whiteness, from the perspective of people who were empowered. This is not the first time, if you understand history, where curriculums and narratives have been developed that never included us or included racial tropes, stereotypes, caricatures. So this is not new for us. This is not new. What I believe is new is that even when those textbooks and history books were written, because they were written during the period of legal segregation, we were teaching our own history in our community. In our segregated schools, in Sunday school, I learned a great deal of my history in Sunday school. Growing up in church, we had our own programs and ways in which we were socialized in the community. So what is different is that we don't have the concentrated, segregated community. But I do think we need to take advantage of the segregation that does exist in our community and pull our children out of the fire and initiate these kinds of lessons. The other piece I wish to add at this time is, is that we need to not only teach history, but teach content.
Thank you.
And context.
Yes.
Teach culture, and then and teach then values, cultural and our racial values. And so what I find as a professor within the really since those who have graduated from high school under the SOL paradigm. So the SOL paradigm was developed under George Bush's 2001
Leave no child behind.
No Child Left Behind. So that's when we began to see school children being taught only to pass an exam. And so what I see in my beloved students at NSU is that I see racial timidness. I see a hesitance to talk about race. There is a hesitance to talk about racial realities. There's also a lack of empathy for their own folks. So the danger of what I see, and the danger if we don't begin to do some very different things with our people, is that one, they're not going to no longer be in the vanguard for our community, for the issues. They're not going to be in the vanguard with regards to really knowing and understanding themselves and their relationship with one another, the relationships that we should have with one another. That is the first idea of how you understand yourself, how you understand yourself in context with your people. They're then not going to engage in some other very normal, ritualistic and healing processes that many generations before have engaged in. How we come together to share, right? How we come together to commiserate, how we come together to lay it all on the table and then be able to go forward back in society. They're just certain rituals, the enduring way in which our religion and spirituality has underscored everything that we have done and been about. So there absolutely are dangers with regards to what has happened politically, but I think we should also, or predominantly, focus on the dangers of what we see in terms of our survival thrust as a collective, our survival thrust as a people uniquely.
You know what? And I think it's by design. They don't want our youth and people to be critical thinkers. And you mentioned George Bush's, and I call it "leave all the children behind."
All the children behind.
How about it?
Because one, it really took out the critical thinking out of a whole generation of kids, and now we're suffering. we have less engineers coming up, and we teach to a test. And so you dropped all of the pretext of critical thinking. You can spit out what the answers are, but how you got the answer is not there. And then so there's one, and you mentioned this
Promo code James.
patriotism.
Per gallon on your first fill up. That's code.
What is that?
Use code
Is
James.
that you, James?
5 cents
What?
per gallon back in your first fill up.
Yeah, something was a back talk.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't hear anything. Let me.
Yeah, we're hearing some back talk.
Yeah, so I'll go back to you use the Dr. Fairfax, the word patriotism. And I will go back to say the other side, or these Confederates that are in office now and in power, are now that they've gotten the House, and they want to, after every meeting, they want to say the Pledge of Allegiance. I call it pseudo. They want to wrap themselves in a flag, and it's pseudo patriotism. It's not real patriotism. Just because you can cite the Pledge of Allegiance, at every meeting, doesn't mean you're any patriotic than any man on the street that's out there. Matter of fact, I'm saying that they are less patriotic because they wanted to overthrow the very government that they were elected or in the same offices that they take now. And then so I just had to get that off my chest. But I think that another point that I wanted to get across here.
7. Let me say by way of announcements, I didn't give any announcements in the
Wait a
first.
minute.
Okay, I just figured it out. I'm sorry. I apologize. Go ahead, Colonel.
Yeah, you talked about the low.
That was Reverend Al Sharpton.
Yeah, the low white birth rate. During when Mr. Trump was in office, you look at the census and the undercounting of minorities across this country, and they baked in for the next 10 years that the people on the Confederacy will be in office and baked in, which they will put these policies in for the next 10 years. That's going to be negatively affect the Black and brown people for the next 10 years. And so we have to really, really go back and look at what was done to us historically from a Mr. Trump and all of those people that he had in offices way back when he was running this country. And then so in the last piece I wanted to say is I looked at the funeral that Al Sharpton and the vice president just participated in the actual brutal murdering of a brother down in Memphis. And I beg the difference, and we have to get by this piece of saying, well, we can gonna demand that Congress pass the George Floyd Policing Act. We as a people in America have to get by and says it is never going to happen as long as the Confederates have the House of Representatives. And it's even now, Uncle Tim Scott, Senator from South Carolina, has already said it is not going to come and pass in the Senate. So and the only way to get our policies that are going to affect us and going to positively affect us, if we, like in Memphis, and I'll bet you if I went through that funeral there and I looked at it, and if I could get everybody to say who was registered to vote and voted, probably only 30% of the folks up there could raise their hands. And unless we come out to the polls, register and come in mass and get people, like-minded people, to come to the polls, they could change history. Say in Tennessee, there's enough people that didn't vote, they'd have the governorship. They'd have their 2 senators up there with Marsha Blackburn, who is a devout racist herself.
No, she's a fruitcake.
Yeah.
So if,
But they could
Colonel
those people out.
So,
Let's
so
say
Colonel,
yeah.
no, you, when you talked about patriotism, patriotism, in the way in which it is being defined and implemented is indoctrination.
Mhm.
They are indoctrinating and they're pushing this indoctrination of patriotism, again, which is by design, because when those Confederate monuments begin to fall, we really see a threatened sense of the white personality and a threatened sense of their idea of a way of life. Their idea of their way of life means anti-Blackness, means Black oppression, Black suppression. We should be crystal clear about that. And we should also, if you are a student of history, should have anticipated everything that is happening today. So I just think Black folk need to just stop being surprised
Thank you. Thank you.
when the oppressor engages in anti-humane behavior toward us. This has been a continuing intergenerational aspect of our struggle. There is not going to be any stopping. Now, the other piece, Colonel, I think the voting issue is absolutely spot on. I also, though, cannot understand, and this is where I think we've not been honestly critical about the Black Lives Matter movement, which I'm a supportive of, but it lacked a legal arm where when we began to protest the murder of Trayvon Martin, there should have been simultaneously suits brought to court cases brought to trial, but there should also have been, if you're a student of history, an economic boycott.
Yes.
But so I could never understand. I could never understand how do you have a movement, but the movement is not interested in crippling the very system that oppresses us. So, and part of the challenge is, as a people, we are so wedded to being comfortable.
Thank you.
So we have decided that our oppression is negotiable. Our oppression should be accepted. Our oppression is compartmentalized, and our oppression is just a part of the way life is. And so there's not then the call to duty, the call to action to engage in economic boycotts. What we learned from history is that economic boycotts are absolutely effective. Effective. And you can bring systems to their knees if you are ready to fight for freedom. What part of the other challenge is, if you're getting an education under the No Child Left Behind paradigm, you don't even know what freedom is. You don't even know what freedom is. You don't even know what it means to truly be emancipated. You don't understand the concept of liberation. So,
you know, as you talk about the importance, as we talk about the importance of knowing your history and history in general, we have people today are so readily ready to dismiss, you know, things that worked back in the day, because a lot of different ideologies were mixed up in there, like nonviolence, you know, and a lot of people don't believe in that. I'm not turning them out of the cheek, but that movement had all the elements you just mentioned, Doctor. You know, they had the legal arm. You had Thurgood Marshall in there fighting all the way up to the Supreme Court, and you had the people out there in the streets, boots on the ground, and those things can work. And we got, you know, a lot of different separate organizations getting all the, you know, the glory and things like that, but they don't have the teeth that it takes to take it down. Like, you have these students and people up there in Florida or down there in Florida protesting. You need people pushing back all over, you know,
And
not just in
pushing.
Florida.
They were committed.
All back.
They were committed to the cause.
Committed.
You could not come in and bring a mole in who would come in and challenge everything that you're doing, take you off course, and then you just give up. You give up the fight. They give up too easily. You know, those people, I mean, who do you see today who would have walked the miles that our those who came before us, who walked, who paid the price, who endured the dogs, who endured the fire hose. You don't have people with that caliber anymore.
Or walk to Washington.
Or walk to Washington. You just
In the
don't have
rain,
it, you
in
know.
the rain and mud, you know.
I remember when I took my youth group, my first youth group to Selma, Alabama, and they had learned about the march across the Pettus Bridge. And the first thing one of my babies wanted to know was, were they going to have the dogs and the water hose when we got to Selma, when we got to the bridge? But
at least they knew that history.
they knew the history. And then not only did they know the history, but then they got a chance to talk to not only those people who participated in the march, but talk to those people who work behind the scenes, because the people who work behind the scenes were just as important, if not even more important than the marchers. But we don't have that connectivity anymore. It's not there anymore. It's not there. I'm thinking about the theme for Black History Month for 2023, Black resistance, how Black Americans work collectively to serve and strengthen their community, making a way out of no way. We don't have that anymore. It's not there anymore, and I don't know what do we do to claim it back. Is that we become so comfortable because we have houses, big houses, we have the cars, we have the luxuries, that we don't have the need anymore to fight for those things that we need. Life, liberty, and justice. It's just not there.
Absolutely. Sure. And so we see important things though that I think we need to seize. The fact that we are together talking about issues pertaining to our people is love. I think we need to point out the expressions of love more.
Mm-hmm.
The work that you do with our children, the other kinds of socializing work that happens with our institutions and our community, the love work we need to highlight and make sure people are aware about. But we also, I think, need to be really honest in terms of how we get back into the minds of our folk, how we make sure that their eyeballs are turning inward. And it really means perhaps putting together a white paper, articulating points of concern with solutions. I think we need to focus a great deal on solutions.
Exactly.
At the local level. And I think we need to really rely very much on our grassroots leaders, because city councils are not going to do it. They're not going to do it. I live in Hampton, and the city council in Hampton in November voted to sell historic property where the Virginia School for the Deaf, Blind, and Multi-Disabled stood for 100 years, decided to sell it to a developer, despite the fact that my mentor, Dr. Mary T. Christian, lobbied for that property to be kept in the community and to be turned into a learning modality. The fact that neighboring Black neighborhoods did not want a manufacturing plant built there. So you had the Black Republican mayor to support it, and he openly supported and praised the contractor. Here you got all these Black leaders sitting in the room, and he praises the developer for being a moral, upstanding person. Just such an anti-Black statement. And only one Black
credit to it.
councilman voted for it, Steve Brown. The other Black councilman did not. So I think we need to even understand anti-Blackness is systemic. That yes, you can be Black and engage in anti-Black.
That's right. That's right.
So we need to be very clear about ideology and concepts and how they are implemented and brought forth to bear. And I think we need to be honest that the city councils simply do not have the intellectual acumen and the will and the respect to ensure that they even are engaged in putting in processes to better our communities, because then they don't want to be labeled as, well, you're favoring Black people. Yeah, if you Black, you ought to favor your people. What are we talking about?
Everybody else favor theirs when they're on there. They take care of their people.
It's very strange. It is strange to have someone say that to you and you think that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the response should be, may the ancestors be praised. That's the response.
I love that.
So we really need to turn inward with our grassroots leaders, those who are doing the work, and amplify the work that they are doing. Still talk to people about economic boycotts. I just think we still need to have that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And then find ways to ensure, such as you're doing, Sister Stith, and you're doing incredible work, and I just am so happy to know you. You're doing incredible work. Find ways to ensure that that work gets resources, get funding within the community.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's unfortunate you're talking about local politics, because we always push here how important local politics is. It's the beginning and for fight, struggle, but it has to start locally. And then when you try to support locally and your local officials go against what your wishes,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's kind of discerning for the people that you try to engage in the local politics, and they see the politicians doing what they want and not what the people want. So we have to get better there. And you know our situation over here in the city of Portsmouth. We can't get out of our own way. Seems like
Exactly.
we're in the news again.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, I wanted to bring this up. Well, Colonel, I'll give you an opportunity to step in there. I don't want. I know I didn't see your little signal there.
Yeah, no. I was talking cool. But you know, you mentioned. I'll harken back to a couple comments here. And when George Floyd was murdered on national TV, and you mentioned how and I'll make a dotted line to the Black City Council in Hampton in selling that land that you just mentioned. Well, they trotted out Uncle Tim Scott as representative of the Confederates in the Senate, and he messed around and pulled the okie doke on society. They knew they knew that they didn't want no parts of getting rid of qualified immunity, and they hold it to this day. But we keep going back to the okie doke and calling for that. They want to negotiate anything. Now that the young brother in Memphis has been killed, they're back at the table saying, well, we need to talk about it. Maybe we can come to it. We ought to know that it is not going to happen. But I think that the economic boycotts would be perfect for them. You know, the boycott all, say, businesses in Florida, and get on Disney to stop giving them in the campaign money that they did after January 6th. Big businesses stopped giving the Confederate Party a lot of money to those politicians. They're back at it now. They have short memories. We should be boycotting those same businesses that put up with this mess. So I like the idea about economic boycotts, but I will also turn back the clock back into the days when we had the Black Panthers and Black Power, because Black Power, we united people on a common cause. I think we need a rebirth of that kind of a movement across the nation, because right now we are so we couldn't boycott a 7-Eleven on High Street if we wanted to. If our national leaders would still go down there to buy whatever with the lotto tickets, whatever we'd do. We need our leaders to stand up and somebody to lead that movement there and have something like the Black Power movement back in our American history. So what say you, Doctor?
So I think that there are elements of the Black Power movement which also was accompanied by the Black Arts movement, which really was so rich, because that just those rich cultural expressions that reminded us of who we and also kept us in the struggle as a collective to move forward. I absolutely think that those elements we should incorporate in this 21st century moment. Uh, but we also need to, though, be mindful that, you know, there were some sexism that was happening,
yes, very much so.
in these movements.
That's right.
And so we can learn lessons from these movements and be able to find ways to coalesce. We can do this. We can do this work. I think too, to add to that, the class schism gets us into trouble.
Yes.
And that is part of why there's not been a call for an economic boycott. So when economic boycotts have worked in the past, the Montgomery bus boycott, and for example, which was an absolute model of success of an economic boycott, the entire community, or at least over 90% of the community, was on board. People did not take that bus. I think with an economic boycott, we've got to start off with exactly one company or one entity at a time. I think we've got to be targeted, and we have to be specific in order to show, okay, we will do this now, that something else may come later. So I think we have to really be strategic in who we're going to boycott and how we're going to boycott. This can easily be solved with some conversations, with discussions with our economic strategists, and to let our political leaders know this is what we are prepared to do. Because the reality is, if we just say, let's just boycott, you have people who just simply are so divorced from our culture and our culture reality. One, they're not going to have an idea, they're not going to understand it, and two, some people are so wedded to being comfortable.
Yes, yes.
And, you know, instead of thinking about, you know, how do I show my love for 2 generations from now? You know, which is what the elders did. They showed their love for us before we were born. Through, you know, they really fought the physical fight. We can fight the economic fight. We can fight this cultural war. We can do this. It is a matter of will and how much you want it. I am in agreement that telling Joe Biden, and Joe Biden has been told this before, that we expect this bill to be passed, but we know the Confederate Party is simply not going to be on board. Listen, Tyree Nichols have died, and it was crickets from their party.
That's right.
You cannot expect the oppressor to see and view and respect your humanity. That is not how this works. But I am saying a strategic economic boycott, which again, that's what A. Philip Randolph threatened to do with the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Economic boycott, money is the only way you appeal to the oppressor, because it threatens their material comfort. We have to really think differently if we want the John Lewis Voting Rights Act passed, and if we want the George Floyd Police Reform Act. Because think about it, Congress just signed last year an anti-lynching bill. We have our ancestors who lobbied for an anti-lynch law in the late 1800s. In the early 1900s, Ida B. Wells fighting for an anti-lynch law. It has taken America over 100 years to finally pass an anti-lynch law. Who's fooling who? Who's fooling who here?
You know, Dr. Fairfax, you know, as we look at Virginia and Governor Youngkins and what he's trying to do, having people telling on people if they are doing a certain thing in school curriculums, you know, what's going to be our responsibilities as educators and as citizens or parents that make sure that, you know, because while we're talking, our kids are still going to school every day. And the attention is away from the actual classroom, getting that knowledge. Like when we were in school, teachers taught outside of that book, made sure we knew certain things were going. But it could almost be a threat to teachers if they go outside of the curriculum. And and we're going to always have those people that's going to go over there and tell, like the guy in Django, you know. So, and use Colonel's reference there, but the guy in Django is going to tell everything.
Exactly.
Even though you're trying to, make sure, because it gives me, it worries me about the future of our HBCUs and the children that are being prepared to enter those HBCUs some generations down the road. If we don't correct it on this level down here, what kind of students are we sending to our HBCUs and our PWIs? Because they need to be in the PWIs as well, educating those people that are there. So what do you see as the responsibility, or what do we need to do to make sure doing all this that we are making sure our kids are educated?
Yeah, that is an absolute important question. All of your questions are important. HBCUs have always been socializing agents. They have always been not just institutions that provide degrees, but socializing agents. HBCUs have been the bastion of your intellectual class. And so the intellectuals at those schools were also very much connected with then engagement and then providing their research, their knowledge, their acumen in the community. That was and has always been the connection. Now, what I think, honestly, what has happened in this new century is this really absurd thrust for particularly state HBCUs to mirror white state schools, white historically universities, in a way to appeal to people at the state level, state accrediting bodies, and to attempt to be defined as a legitimate institution. Again, within our culture, your institution should look differently. Your institution should look differently because your culture is different. Our churches look differently. Our churches feel and function differently from white churches in the same denomination. Other organizations, our Masons, look different. The way in which they move and operate in secret look different. Our tents organizations, other youth organizations, even Black Girl Scout troops. The work, I was a Girl Scout. What I learned as a Girl Scout in talking to white Girl Scouts in my age, they learned different stuff. I'm like, okay, but I'm clear. I learned what was required for me to understand who I was and be able to write to apply. So HBCUs need to not fear, one, being Black schools, not fear functioning as a Black institution, and be about the work of properly socializing its students. So you're having freshmen, some, who are coming from some school systems where some things were not properly perhaps taught, inculcated, then that freshman year ought to look differently for students at an HBCU. You just don't throw them in class and the professor then is having to unlearn 12 years of an experience. This is a major flaw. And or you then don't have students major in disciplines and not take one class in Black history or Black culture or Black science. So there is not, I argue, the appropriate socialization that should occur at our schools with this population of our young people moving forward. You also, I believe, should have a way of not only ensuring that there is intellectual development, but ensuring that there's cultural, political, economic development, and that they really understand that, I'm not just here to get this degree, I'm really here to be in the vanguard for my community as we move forward. And I would wager as I talk to my colleagues at many other schools, that is not quite happening.
Yes. You know,
And
I don't know if I
in.
mentioned
I have
it.
to throw, Leah, just I have to throw this in. You mentioned about the Girl Scouts, and I was a Boy Scout, and they taught us through the handbook when we went out in the woods how to survive. But outside of that handbook, I can remember Scoutmasters not only teaching us what was in the handbook, but teaching us how our ancestors survived in the woods during the Underground Railroads. And that always stuck with me because at first I didn't understand, well, why are we going outside the book? But he was telling, and later on, I realized how significant that was.
Mhm,
He went outside the book and taught us how our ancestors survived,
mhm.
which
That's right.
was even better than what was in that book. And
That's right.
I bring that up because it's a responsibility in a lot of areas of our life where we got to keep this education of history alive, regardless of what they're doing on the state and national level. It's important that we be aware and make sure we have a responsibility as well to keep it. I'm
You know,
sorry, you mentioned Girl Scouts, and I had to.
I was thinking about Wade Noble in your statement that you just made. I went to a conference where Wade Noble spoke, and Wade Noble talked about the saltwater fish, how beautiful the saltwater fish is, how the saltwater fish has beautiful colors, how that saltwater fish moves through the water. He moves with a rhythm through the water. You know, how that saltwater fish only ate certain foods, and how that saltwater fish knew how to work with his community and work within his community. He said, and then you start taking the salt out of the water. He said, when you start taking the salt out of the water, the saltwater fish loses its color. That saltwater fish loses its rhythm. That saltwater fish forget that there are certain things I don't eat. He started eating everything. The saltwater fish started fighting against his brothers and sisters because they didn't work as a collective unit again. And he said, now, how do you get that saltwater fish back into shape? You got to put the salt back in the water. And that's the same thing for us as a people. Our culture has been taken away from us. And until we can put that culture back in to our people, we are lost just like that saltwater fish. And we got to find a way to get it back.
Precisely. And these are some of the ways and others that I know you all have unpacked on your shows. We should do it. But, you know, I'm going to tell you, this is how you know that there's this greater metaphysical thing happening, because in my class today, I quoted Dr. Nobles.
I love Dr. Noble. I love him.
I had, as a graduate student, I had the privilege of sitting at the feet of Dr. Wade Nobles. For the listening audience, Dr. W. Wade Nobles is one of the nation's preeminent African-centered psychologists. And he is the one who developed the theoretical observation that Black families were really African families. And how we function as African families. He's just phenomenal. But I want to say one of the other things that Dr. Nobles coined is a really important definition of power. And I told this to my class. I told them, you need to write this definition down. So, you know, he said that power is the ability for you to tell someone else that your reality is their reality, and then they'll make that reality their own reality. But it's really your reality, and that is power. And that is a part of what we are fighting against. We really are fighting against this principality of white supremacy. And part of the lag and the fatigue, I do think there's a struggle fatigue in our community, and that's a term coined by Dr. Daoudi Azibo, my mentor, and another really well-known African-centered psychologist. So I do think there's a level of survival fatigue that we see in our community, but also this profound sense of power and reality. And that just because you have influential Black folk who are rich doesn't mean that they're powerful. It doesn't mean that they impact policy, and that there's this really skewed sense of reality. So think your conditions are not going to get better appealing to Joe Biden is a moderate. Joe Biden is not going to sign an executive order. He is not going to do that. And we already know that the Confederate Party, openly now Confederate Party, isn't going to vote for those laws.
Exactly.
So then you got to decide to do something radically different.
Mm-hmm.
And it's radical love.
Mm-hmm.
It's radical love for our people. Yes.
Mm. Love it. I love it.
Love it, love it, love it. But you know, because we got 5 minutes left, but what I forgot to say earlier is that and give a disclaimer is the views and statements stated on this program are the guests and the hosts and nobody else, so we can stay out of Facebook jail. So get that off our tables. But you know, you mentioned the word survival fatigue. Yes, I think across the board, yes, we are having a lot of survival fatigue. And you also talk about the rich and powerful, and I talked about Uncle Tim and some other prominent Black leaders on the Confederates, were supposedly on the Confederate side. They're only 1 degree off of being Black, of being caught coming back from the Senate one day or driving in South Carolina, and one of the Georgia boys catch him, and they're going to find out that no matter how much money you have, you're still Black.
Amen.
Well, it seems like with Tim Scott, he has decided that it is just mentally expendable to dispose of his Blackness at times when he thinks he needs it to survive, because he has, in interviews, he has shared how he has been stopped and treated as a senator, and yet none of those experiences have compelled this man to really think critically and differently about who he is and to come on back home. So people like that, you just have to wonder about some other levels of emotional distress and cultural misorientation and alienation. Gotta question spirit. Gotta question spirituality.
Exactly.
When you behave in that way. Dr. Azebo developed a nosology. It is incredible. I can send it to you all to share.
Please
but
do.
what he does is he has posited 55 behaviors that really are cultural misorientation as a result of enslavement and living in an anti-Black oppressive system. So these are anti-Black, spiritually alienating behaviors that we find emanating in our community because of the centuries of violent, oppressive, anti-Black systems we have been forced to interface with. So when you see people like who show those behaviors, it speaks to the level of, even with your own personality and your own interface with systems, that you are so willing to negotiate and just max out your Blackness. And we see that one of the behaviors, I cannot think of the name of it, but he deals with the way in which profanity now has become an omnipresent part of language that we see. Just you know, when I was growing up, I rarely heard people use profanity. Profanity was used when something may have occurred, but it wasn't a part of the daily, in everyday conversation, in your responses. But profanity is now just a part of a sentence. It is the verb, the subject,
everything.
It is the adjective. and what he does is he explains that the use of profanity really shows that the person is in a state of profaneness, that the profaneness has taken over the way in which the person interfaces with the world, even their own people. Even their own people, they are supposed to see God in. We see God in all folk. We see God in everything, but not when you are in the constant state of profaneness. And we see that, and I really believe to some degree, that's where many of us are.
Mhm,
So we are so spiritually alienated that we have not even been able to find grounds of sacredness
mhm.
in our community.
Mm. Well, you need to send that to us.
I will,
We need that. We need that.
I will
And you,
do that.
and you know, and Dr. Fairfax, I just want to share one thing with all of us as we're celebrating Black History Month. My first trip over to Ghana,
Mm.
and we were in the slave castle,
Mm.
and the curator there, he came to us and he said, my first trip over was with Ron Brown and all of those individuals, and he told us, he said, listen, he said, no disrespect to my European visitors, he said, but I need to speak to my African American brothers and sisters. He said, you left here as cargo, but you've come back as head of commerce, because Ron Brown was head of commerce then. You come back here as doctors, lawyers, teachers. He said, I apologize for the role the African played in the slave trade. He said, yeah, we caught our brothers and sisters and we held them in bondage. He said, but never would we have thought that selling them to the white man would mean that they would be taken away from their motherland. So they said, but you come back here, you're doctors, you're lawyers, you're all of these great things. You live in the best houses, you drive the best cars, you have the best education. Why don't you act like it? Folks got mad. Folks got
I'm sure
mad.
they did.
But there was no
So-
need to get mad because he was speaking truth.
Right. And what he was speaking of the probably the anti-African behavior
Yes,
that many
yes.
of them
That's it.
exhibited and didn't even know it, because we don't know what freedom is.
Thank
And we
you.
don't know what liberation is, and we don't know, what it means to be engaged in emancipatory behavior. But I do want to say for the listening audience that yes, there were some Africans who participated, but the enslavement trade was not an African country
No,
sponsored
no.
trade. European countries sponsored and grew profitable.
That's right.
But so it's a difference between European countries sponsoring the trade versus some rogue Africans who, yes, did not understand that
Didn't
on the other
understand.
side
Yes.
of the water there was this thing called perpetual
Thank you.
enslavement by law.
That's
And
right.
I just want
That's
to
right.
make that caveat because part of the challenge, I believe, is that there are people, again, when you have other people educating your folks who believe that Africans have just all done it to ourselves in terms of enslavement. So there's this unwillingness then to embrace and to love, because there's this false narrative that Africans had equal involvement, decision making, resources, and profited from the global trafficking of our ancestors.
Because for them, it was, I capture my brother and I take him to where I am, and my brother works sort of as an indentured servant, not as a slave.
But not only that, I think we then we dilute ethnicity. So when there were African people who were capturing other people, it was because there was a war happening between ethnicities. So our ancestors didn't call themselves Africans; they called themselves by their ethnicities. They were either Zulu or Yoruba or Bantu, right, or Igbo or Efe. So it's the use of the term African that we see in documents of the enslavement trade. So when there were wars and conflict, then yes, there was the let me capture. So I think that those intricacies about the enslavement trade just don't get taught.
Yeah, they don't. It doesn't. It does not. It does not.
So,
I hope you all will have me back.
Well, you got to. An hour is not enough. An hour is not enough, and there's so much more to be discussed.
This is awesome. I'm grateful and humbled for the opportunity to serve. I consider this serving our community. I consider this a really important part of who I am. And because I was born and raised in community, I believe I have an obligation.
Exactly.
An obligation to serve in this capacity. I really thank you so much for the opportunity. Asante Sana, thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
so as we close out, I just want to make this one point as we look at the Confederates, I'm gonna start using that term too, as the people who they put up against our most intellectual people. You know, imagine, and you see this all the time now, Candace Owens having a conversation with Dr. Cornel West.
Please,
The
please.
people they are putting up against, you know, we know about the Herschel Walker thing. We got Taylor Greene in Congress. And, you know, so we just have to be aware and take the people that we know that they know. You know, they probably can't even find anybody to put up against you, Dr. Fairfax, that would
I'd like to see them do that.
that could, you know, make any kind of sense on their behalf. So
I haven't had the opportunity, but I will go where the ancestors send me. So,
There you go.
So,
But James, you know what? They really wouldn't understand what she's talking about. That would be the first thing. So they couldn't come up against her because they wouldn't know what she was talking about. You know?
well, you get a chance, watch one of those dialogues between Dr. West and Candace Owens, and the way he
I heard
handles
one. It's ridiculous.
the way he handles her in a way
Yeah.
that it just goes way over her head because
She didn't have a clue.
her, and she doesn't even get it. You know,
She didn't have a clue.
that's who they put up. You know,
that's what
but
they put up.
anyway, we have to continue these solution-based conversations, and Dr. Fairfax, we're going to have you back. You're a part of our family now, and these conversations have to keep going on. And hopefully, HBCUs, like back in the day, the HBCUs, the Black colleges and universities, played a pivotal role in civil rights. Even during the freedom rides, their campuses were havens for stops where they couldn't go anywhere else. So we have to get our HBCUs to get more involved, and our youth to get like those high school students in Florida.
In Florida, yes.
You know, so hopefully they will influence a lot of our young people to step up and say, I'm not taking this, you know, I mean, I want to know my history. But anyway, we're going to continue these conversations. And if our host, go ahead.
And James, and Howard Darden is saying that the students at Howard University are an agent of activism there. First to march on the streets fighting for change. And that's where our struggle began with our college students. Our college students were primarily involved in our freedom movement.
Yes, back in the day with SNCC.
That's right. That's right.
That's right.
That's where my dad got his law degree, and he came right back here to Portsmouth and used that after he was fired from being a teacher because he spoke up about equal pay. And they said, you're fired. He said, okay, I've been in the Navy. I'll take that GI Bill, go to college, go back to college and get my law degree, and came back and fought under the, with the law under his arm. And he came, I remember we would go on vacations and he always had a law book.
My book's on his arm.
And if he had any problem, he just slammed that law book on, going into hotels, because at this time they couldn't, Kennedy had declared that we could go anywhere, we could stay anywhere. And if they tried it, he slapped that law book on the desk. And, so showing that he had the law on his side this time. Educated those people. We can stay here. You can't stop us. But anyway, I just throw that tidbit in there. That shout out to Howard University.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
But any other closing comments from our host?
I'm just waiting for the day when each of us can be like Ma Pollard and say, my feet is tired, but my soul is rested. That means you have done your part to make life better for those in our community. And Dr. Fairfax, thank you for all the, I said before I went to come and audit your class, I don't know if they let you audit classes. They used to do that a long time ago, but I'd like to come and sit in.
But that's an example. That's an example of what we should be doing to educate our community. That process should be in place for anyone in the community to be able to come and sit in, because that's a part of how we create an intelligent group of people. It just doesn't make sense that we don't have those modalities in place. I'm saying that.
Because, for those that didn't go to HBCUs, the most they know about is the amazing homecomings and the bands and everything like that. If they had the opportunity to see what goes on in those classes, you know, the level of respect for HBCUs or that people that didn't go, or college people that went to PWIs, the level of respect would go even higher. It's not all about the homecomings and the Greeks and the parties. That classroom is the most important experience that any student can have at the HBCU. And that needs to get out there to those people that don't know.
Yeah.
I agree.
Well, you know what? You're talking about the educated and the HBCUs and the difference in the PWIs. And I had a friend of mine that was, we grew up together in the Army Nurse Corps, and she became the Corps Chief, which is a 2-star, and later on was the first female Surgeon General for the Army. And she was white, friend of mine, great person. And I remember sitting there when I was a lieutenant colonel. She talked about the top leadership in the Army Nurse Corps, and she put out the top 20 universities that for the leadership had gone to. And you know what? Almost half of them were HBCU schools.
Wow.
And I spent 9 years in recruiting command, recruiting, you know, for healthcare workers for the Army. And I would always say, I'm a graduate twice from HBCU schools, North State and Hampton. And then I also have a couple masters from PWIs. And I always tell them the educational background and that I got at my HBCU schools, I will stand them up against any universities across this country. Anywhere.
And it's no coincidence that we mentioned on our last show that North Carolina A&T puts out the most
engineers,
Black engineers,
Black engineers in the whole country.
Yeah.
So that's just where that's part of the plan. That's part of the plan. Okay, thanks again. And Doctor, do you have any parting words? I think you may have, but if you have any parting words, and yeah.
I think when you understand the concept of freedom, it means you have to make a determination that every morning you wake up, that's exactly what you're going to pursue. That's your modus operandi. And it also is about rescuing other people from that prison that they live in. That's not their reality. And I just think that's important to say that every day you've got to be engaged in the freedom stuff. You got to be engaged in the struggle. There was a song, woke up this morning on my mind, stayed on freedom.
Stayed on freedom.
You have to be in that moment, because the reality is you've got to understand the war that our people are in. And we are in a cultural war.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
Okay, well, thanks again. And please join us this Monday as you're going to get a little dose of the hosts talking about their experiences as far as Black history is concerned. What we experienced growing up, a lot of us were on the tail end of that Jim Crowism, and saw some things and what we can share from our grandparents. And we introduce another guest host, which would be Roderick Hawthorne, a younger version of us, so we can get this perspective on what we're doing. We're trying to be as diverse as we can, because everybody has different ideas from different generations, so we can learn from each other. So join us Monday at 6:30 a.m. on our Monday morning show. And again, thank you, Dr. Fairfax.
Thank you, Dr. Fairfax. It's always a pleasure having you on Portsmouth Coffee Talk.
Yes, and Portsmouth Coffee Talk is here for our voice,
our community,
in our future.
And we salute you, Dr. Fairfax.
Thank you.
I salute you back.
Thank you.
I salute you back.
Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Thank you.